Patients have attacked more than 60 hospital staff members since January 2022, and on this Workers' Day, unions and political parties are concerned about the safety and security of healthcare workers across the country. They're calling on officials to urgently put measures in place to keep staff safe.
Most of the attacks have been by mentally ill patients, biting, scratching and kicking staff. Nurses have been punched in the face and security guards hit in the groin. The worst offenders, patients at the Westkoppies Psychiatric Hospital, followed by Chris Hani Baragwanath, Carltonville and Far East Rand.
We continue to put measures in place to empower healthcare workers on how to respond to incidents of attacks on staff at health facilities. So far, we've had about 61 incidents, majority of which can be attributed to mental health care users, while others relate to anger towards staff for various reasons, such as our staff refusing to buy patients' items or patients trying to escape.
Health Workers Union DENOSA is concerned about the high number of attacks.
We are disturbed by the high number of incidents where healthcare workers have been attacked or injured by mental health care users. And we believe that this is part of a bigger problem, which we have raised with the department on previous occasions and in other platforms as well.
The details of the attacks on healthcare workers came after a series of questions sent to Gauteng Health MEC.
It's really very distressing that there have been so many attacks on staff in Gauteng hospitals, particularly from mental health patients. Obviously, there needs to be beefed up security, but what I think we also need, particularly in the smaller hospitals, is dedicated psychiatric wards.
Gauteng Health says it's putting measures in place to deal with the situation.
Among the measures that we've put in place includes continuous training of staff in terms of how to deal with aggression and patients that are violent, improving the profiling of the patients themselves so that staff members attending to those patients have a better history in terms of what some of the underlying conditions.
Nursing Union DENOSA is calling for a swift response from government.
We are therefore calling on the department to ensure that safety is adhered to at all times, and that they need to ensure as well that they put these mental health care users in places which are equipped to house them.
The union further says they will not stop fighting to ensure that the safety of all healthcare workers is improved, and will continue to hold the health department responsible until they do so.
As South Africa paused to observe another Workers' Day today, many have questioned the value of the commemoration amid high levels of unemployment and joblessness in the country. The Public Servants Association of South Africa has said that Workers' Day needs to be more than a commemoration of past gains. The DA says there is not much to celebrate on Workers' Day when millions of South Africans cannot find a job. Meanwhile, the ANC has assured workers that the party is seized with challenges the working class faces. Now, to look at this a bit more further and analyze this day and what it symbolizes, we are now joined by Trade Union Federation Cosatu's parliamentary coordinator, Matthew Parks, and he joins us via our Zoom link. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us here on the late edition on SABC News. One would ask, during a time where workers are faced with a high rising cost of food prices, inflation, dealing with the high interest rates, what would you say are the more pressing problems facing workers today in South Africa?
Yeah. Good evening. Thanks for having us. And apologies, I'm in a slightly noisy place at an airport. Look, I think the point of Workers' Day is not...
All right. We seem to have lost Matthew Parks there for our commemoration for May Day. And you would have seen that throughout the day. We've seen a number of celebrations taking place, be it the May Day rally that took place in Bethlehem in the Free State, where President Cyril Ramaphosa did address that sector, that part of the May Day celebrations. And I'm hearing now from our producers that Matthew Parks seems to be back with us. Matthew, you were still dealing with the more pressing challenges facing South African workers. If you could just give us a bit of that insight.
Yeah, no, thanks, and apologies for the connection cut earlier. Look, the challenges facing South African workers are huge. We have an unemployment rate of 42%. We have rising levels of poverty and inequality. We have seen many workers lose their wages over the period of COVID-19. And of course, the public services that workers depend upon across the country are in many instances fragmenting, deteriorating under huge pressure. But I think the point of Workers' Day is not simply to be complacent or to rest on our previous victories, etc. It's to say, what are the challenges facing workers? What progress have we made? What are the key tasks we need to take forward? And how can we do so over the next period? There's a chance to account to workers as trade unions, and there's a chance to get a new mandate from them, and of course to re-energize and rededicate ourselves to keep pushing. It's not meant to be a celebration or a holiday for the sake of a holiday, but it's really to shine the spotlight on the challenges workers face on a daily basis, and there are many. We have domestic workers being harassed at the workplace. We have mine workers dying in the mines. We have nurses being paid a pittance. We have police officers being killed in the line of duty. So as long as we have those challenges, then we need to have workers organizing to trade unions. We need to keep pushing hard as Cosatu to improve the lives of our members and of workers across the country.
And, coming to the celebrations in which we saw today, or the commemoration, one would say that you heard a lot of the reconfiguration of the alliance once more. This is something that the SACP has touched on. We are hearing it again, even from Cosatu themselves. Is there room to find each other when it comes to this reconfiguration and what it should look like, especially going to the 2024 elections?
Yes, we have to. So as Cosatu, we're a worker-owned organization. The mandate from our members across our unions is that we need to reconfigure the alliance. Our members support the ANC. Our members support the South African Communist Party. They want the alliance to succeed. The challenges facing South African workers are huge. And we think it's only the alliance which has a progressive heart, the progressive interests at heart, that can take up these issues. We cannot trust it to other parties which have openly and often sought to collapse our progressive labor laws or to undermine workers' rights or trade unions. But of course, we want to see the alliance doing better. Government has to listen more to workers' issues. They cannot turn a deaf ear to them. We also need to see the party also being active on the ground, assisting workers. We're going to the most difficult elections next year, where many of the gains that workers have achieved since 1994, and there are many, many gains, like our progressive labor laws, our minimum wage, the free housing, education, and subsidized transport, tertiary education for poor children, and so forth. Many of those gains will be under threat. We want to say as workers, we need to defend those gains, but also to say to our alliance partners, we can't be complacent. We need to do much better. We can't celebrate an unemployment rate of 42%, huge amounts of poverty, declining public services, high levels of load shedding and corruption, cable theft, and so on. But these are challenges that are huge, and government on its own can't resolve all of them. We need the private sector also to come to the party, to invest in the economy, to find ways to create jobs, to pay workers a living wage. We also as trade unions need to be much more on the ground, wherever workers are under pressure, to say how can we defend them, how can we empower them, make sure their wages and their conditions of service and their jobs are protected at all times.
And Matthew, coming to the role that unions play in South Africa and looking in particular to what we faced during COVID-19 and how working has changed, you find that a lot of people are now working from home and more companies are now even adopting that sort of approach. When you look at these dynamics, especially in terms of how working has changed, how has that affected you as a Cosatu?
It's affected all of us, and it's going to continue to affect all of us. The nature of work is changing. Many of the jobs that existed 20 years ago, 30 years ago, have gone. Many of the jobs we have today, not just blue-collar worker jobs in the factories, but even low-skilled jobs, but even white-collar jobs are also going to go. And I think our task as a responsible trade union is to say, with government and with business, how can we invest in the skills of workers so they can have jobs, not just in the economy of today, but also in the economy of tomorrow, because change will happen. The point is to make sure we don't leave workers behind. We can't afford to see any worker being sent to the unemployment queue when we have 4 out of 10 workers being unemployed. We have money available in the CETAs and the various skills authorities and funds and so forth, but often it is wasted on bizarre courses which don't really make sense. We need to really see how can we invest in our skills. So not only can the workers find jobs in South Africa's economy, but that the South African economy as a whole can remain competitive across the world. If you look at the successful economies in the world today, be it in China or Korea or Singapore and so forth, or Sweden, it's because they invested in the skills of those workers, and they constantly reinvented their skills, constantly invested more and more and more, and hence these workers can find not just jobs, but decent, well-paying jobs. And that's what we need to do for South Africans, because change is happening. We can't stop it. We can't stand in the way of it. Often change can be better for the quality of life and the productivity of the economy and so forth. But we need to make sure that we, as unions, push the needs of workers at the front, because employers won't do it. Government on its own won't do it. It's up to Cosatu and the unions to say to the employers and to the state, this is what we need to do to empower workers to make sure they can find jobs, especially for young people, for women, for people in rural areas, for people with disabilities who are most at risk, but even other parts of the workforce as well.
And Matthew, wrapping up our discussion, and when we look and reflect on May Day, particularly in South Africa, what should it symbolize now, especially during a time where, we find ourselves 29 years of freedom and, of course, celebrating 30 years next year, of course, of the first election. What should May Day symbolize now for South Africans?
Yeah. So May Day started in 1886 in Chicago when workers protested against horrific abuse of working conditions and were shot for doing so. And there's been similar worker struggles in every country of the world, including South Africa, where Cosatu and workers led the struggle for many years against the most brutal apartheid regime. So it's reflecting those kind of challenges. But also we do acknowledge and we do celebrate and take ownership of our many victories that workers and trade unions and Cosatu have achieved since 1994. Our progressive labor laws, the right to paid leave, the right to paid holidays, the right to be protected from injury on work, the right to unemployment insurance, a national minimum wage, the prohibition of discrimination against people based on race or gender or sexual orientation. During COVID-19, over the past 2 years, we had released 64 billion rand from the Unemployment Insurance Fund to help nearly 6 million workers in the private sector to be able to take care of their families. So these are many of the gains we have won, but it's not enough when you have an unemployment rate of 42% and huge levels of poverty, very low paid wages for many workers, many of our labor rights being undermined by employers. So it's also a chance for us to put a spotlight to say employers need to ensure they abide by the labor laws, that workers can go to the workplace without fear of being injured or dying, that workers can know they'll be paid at least a minimum wage, all the labor rights to join unions, to negotiate, will be respected and so forth. It's also about us to say, over the next year, we expect government to finalize the legislation in Parliament to allow workers who are struggling, who are in debt, early access to the pension funds from the 1st of March next year, because workers are really drowning in debt. They need help to pay off the loans so they can take care of their families. So making sure this Parliament passes the National Health Insurance Bill so workers have access to quality education. It's about finalizing the expropriation bill in Parliament so we can help address the land dispossession issue, because many farm workers, many other workers would love to own their own land, to build homes, to build small farms, to build economic opportunities for themselves and for their families. So it's really about saying to us, what more do we need to do? And of course, it's a chance to report back to workers, what have we done in the past year, where we have managed to strengthen the Employment Equity Act that requires companies who want to do business with the state to be in compliance with employment laws, the national minimum wage law. It's a chance for us to say to workers, we have now made sure that domestic workers...
All right, thank you very much, Matthew. We've unfortunately run out of time there, but thank you so much for that insight and speaking to us from an airport.